I'm Jonty Sharples. I'm Design Director at Albion. We're a creative agency that builds challenger brands and products and communications for entrepreneurial businesses. Once upon a time, I was a freelancer. I watched a lot of Columbo and drank a lot of tea and flicked through books by TDR and Attic. And I produced a lot of fluffy dross while swanning around. I'd happened across a career, something I never thought I'd be lucky enough to have. Here was something I could accomplish with the minimum of effort extended upon my part, and which selfishly allowed me to get a pat on the head and an ego massage off a client now and again too. So, that was my job paradise honeymoon. And as with many things in life, without any real challenge, I soon realized that satisfaction could not be found in regurgitating yet another 12-inch sleeve flash microsite using Neuropol. That isn't Neuropol, because I couldn't find the font for today. Using a variety of, gradients and oblique vectors. Fortunately, I had a friend. His name was Mike. He's a Swiss German, and he introduced me to the Swiss school. And that was that. I borrowed and went out and finally bought a book, this book, The Grid System by Joseph Müller-Brockmann. And this book changed my life, and I don't use that term lightly. Don't panic. I still watched Columbo, still drank loads of tea, but I began to really pay attention and consider what it was I was doing. And I began to respect my craft and my clients and my output. I began to talk about my work passionately. Prior to that, I don't think I actually remember having a decent conversation about the sort of stuff I was producing, and most likely because it was this. I've not only seen good and bad practice and been party to both, but I've also seen and been intimately involved with arrogance in all its forms. Good and bad practice we can usually agree on. It's when we start to talk about arrogance that the shades of grey begin to appear, and it's a bit more ambiguous. So what do I mean by arrogance? There are two types of arrogance I'd like to address today. First is essentially laziness. And to me, this is sloppy and uncaring thought and execution. Whether the work is paid for or voluntary, someone somewhere is getting shafted. That could be just because of the arrogant output. It could be your boss, your colleagues, your client, or your end user, or in this case, your audience, as we'll call them today. If you don't care about your work, you can pretty much guarantee your output will be less than underwhelming. Sounds terribly obvious, but to some extent it is. What I've noticed over the last decade and a half is that this lack of engagement within the big D design industry is endemic. And I don't care if you're a UX practitioner, graphic designer, developer, Arduino squirrel, mini maker researcher, producer, or QA tester. Every single one of us contributes to the design of products and services, both virtual and physical. And as such, we have a responsibility, not only to our end user, but to our profession as a whole. Have some beer. Certainly as we mature and our distinctive industry continues to expand and embed itself across new sectors, and as we convince those who have no understanding of what we do or our practices that they must absolutely buy what we sell or be doomed to failure, we need to step back and ask ourselves, are we selling the right thing here? And are the people practicing it the right ones for the job? Which leads me nicely onto the second form of arrogance, deception. We are all guilty of deception now and again. It is not usually malevolent, vindictive, targeted, or intended, but we all deceive on a fairly regular basis. And it's this form of deception that creates the foundation of arrogance part 2. We believe that we're entitled to deceive. There are those that deceive their audience, those that sell apples as oranges, those that hope that no one will be any the wiser and they will get away with the perfect crime. There is, however, a much murkier side to this form of arrogant deception. Dark pattern makers, subversive designers, behaviorists, and copywriters of fine print. It's designers of train carriages that are only 43 centimeters in diameter that squeeze extra bodies into tiny seats but don't allow enough space down the aisle for a pram or a wheelchair or someone with a walking stick or a suitcase. Penny Mordaunt is an MP for Portsmouth North, I think. And she made a statement when her constituents complained about the train carriages from South West Trains. A seat on which one cannot sit is a seat in name only. And South West Trains came back saying that the criticism of the carriages in question was mere comfort concerns. Customers are expecting this, or an approximation of it, and what they are getting is this. But not until it's almost too late. They're basically sitting. It's pretty much the worst kind of pull back and reveal you can play. And it's still arrogant design because it's saying, look, the audience, by the time they got to this point, they won't believe or expect what we're doing. And they'll be so worn down by the time they get to this point that they'll do whatever we ask of them. Now, at this point, I'd usually go bad-mouthing a well-known product design company, but instead, I'll skip that and target one of my childhood heroes. For clarity, I should say that I love Stark, and I thought long and hard before making him the core of this presentation and publicly deriding his work. But he is responsible for producing an awful lot of pretty poorly considered products and architecture. But before I hold him up to be the epitome of arrogance, I should say this is one of my favorite pieces of design ever, and it's a house. It's the quality of design may rest on the fact that it's his product, it's got his name behind it, it's a Stark branded product. It's a house and he lives in it sometimes when he's swanning about France. And it comes in a box, or it used to, when boxes came with VHSs and hammers and a little tricolor for topping out. It's quick and fairly straightforward to build. You can source much of the timber locally if you build it in a forest as you're meant to. But somewhere along the way, Stark kind of reached that strange design plateau where he'd been doing this thing for so long and been endlessly praised for his successes and fawned over by the Alessis and the Thompsons and hotel magnates. There was no longer a genuine struggle to get things made. He no longer had to fight his corner. He created fairly utilitarian bits and pieces, adding a touch of Stark pixie dust to a toothbrush or a television set or a stool. And then it all kind of fell over. I suppose that as soon as you begin to get your own way the whole time, the hardest thing to remember is that you're actually designing for others. If you have a dig about and read some of the customer reviews of his products, their functionality, they're almost uniformly dire. To sum up, I love this thing, I just wish it weren't so awful to use. Stark, for me, exemplifies the amalgamation of both streams of arrogance, both sloppy and uncaring thought and execution, and deception. Just because it's left the drawing board and is with the developers or the manufacturers, it doesn't mean that you're no longer responsible for the end product. If you want a more current example, look at the shiny things in your hands, or the applications that you run on them. This feeling that form takes priority isn't uncommon, and certainly wasn't and isn't an isolated behavior. And this is where it starts to get sticky. It's clear we must have confidence in order to take risks, because risks can generate the amazing. This is fairly amazing. It's Stark's wind turbine. It's fairly cheap to purchase. It's available in transparent plastic, so it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. It's extremely quiet because it's on the vertical rather than the horizontal, and it's kind of desirable. When he previewed it in Milan, he said, energy should not be a punishment. We should create a desire among people to produce it. I would love to see them on sale in supermarkets. And this is one of the many reasons why I suppose I'm in a bind. I really, really like Stark. I used to really love him. And then I became a designer. And I worked in a process. And everything I previously enjoyed and relished about Stark and his output was tarnished. And I began to think about these things that he'd been producing had been manufactured. It's important to ensure that confidence does not turn into arrogance. Arrogance is a bad thing. This is Judy Estrin. She's one of the co-founders of Cisco. She's on the advisory board at Stanford, director of FedEx and Disney. She's kind of got it all. Anyway, she believes that there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and I tend to agree. To paraphrase, arrogance indicates that you are not listening to your customers or your employees, and that you are not looking at your competitors honestly. And this kind of covers everything. So it's the people you work with, the customers you're serving, and your competitors, who, realistically, you should be worried about. And this is why there should never be a stage in product development where there's a single discipline operating in a bubble. And this diagram is why I fell out of love with Stark. Equally, if we believe that when a meeting has happened or a document's been emailed over, our role is fulfilled, then we are not doing justice to our work. let alone considering the audience or our customer. Stark is an ideas machine, and like most ideas machine, every now and again, something wonderful pops out. When I was at school, I saved for weeks in order to be able to afford volume 1, there are 2 volumes, of the Taschen coffee table monolith. And if you flick through it, you see how much beautiful disposability has been produced. There's a few nice pieces, but nothing of any real substance. And I suppose that could be why in 2009 he threw the ultimate hissy fit and jacked it all in. I was a producer of materiality, and I am ashamed of this fact. Everything I designed was unnecessary. And then, design is a dreadful form of expression. Anyway, has anyone got one of these? One. Any more? Just one. It's not a bad ratio. Have you used it? Did you use it 2 days ago? You got this? Right. Both, in my opinion, useless and magnificent examples of form over function. I'm really sorry. Or more importantly, arrogance in design. I'm still curious how the lemon squeezer has found its way into so many permanent collections in so many design museums all over the world. And the kettle will burn you if you try and pour boiling water from it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that quirky innovation or humor in design should be banished, far from it. Some of the most beautiful and joyous experiences are as a result of delivering a little hit of delight alongside your functionality. Surely, though, if a product is marketed as being able to perform a task and cannot, then it's close to garbage. This is Jack Carman's coffee pot for masochists, and it is not meant to work. This is Stark's kettle. It is. In Gary Huswitz's Objectify, Karim Rashid, who normally I don't pay any attention to, says, "It's crazy. Imagine if you design 1 million chairs today, why on earth would you have an uncomfortable chair?" Why not indeed? The only reason, in my opinion, would be it's not validated and it's not been tested. And this can either be attributed to laziness, stupidity, a lack of budget, or a mixture of all three. The juicy salif does not work. It's a classic example of form over function. It doesn't work, does it? It's a mess. Yeah. Right. If they tested it properly, they'd have found this out in prototyping. This lemon juicer works. I have one. It works really, really, really well. And it's probably because it's been tweaked and modified through its life cycle. There's a little pointy bit, the hole in the handle for you to put a thread through, there's a ridge to stop the juice running down your hand, and all things evolved as the product was used over time. Now, laziness is not wrong per se. Human beings were born lazy. We were designed lazy. We are lazy by default, if you will. The only way we stop being lazy is by motivation. Carrot and stick. Sometimes there is no carrot, and sometimes there is no stick. All there is us. And what it boils down to is passion. If you're not passionate about what you're doing day to day, go off and do something else. Seriously, I mean, if you're not, how to put this, if you are less than interested in the product your client is selling or the customer they are selling it to, then give up. What I mean is if you're not passionate about the delivery method of a solution to any client or any of their customers, then perhaps you should consider another career. If you're not passionate about the way in which you go from creating a thing to delivering it and making sure that that thing is the best thing you can deliver for those people, then you need to really step back and look at your career. I believe a cultural shift is in order to continue to produce good work and combat this malaise. Obviously, it's not such a great idea to go around pointing fingers. We all have careers and rent and mortgages and families and partners and whatever. And there's no point in alienating ourselves from potential employers and colleagues and clients. But if it's possible to make a small shift in attitude and mindset within an organization, and there are people in this room who hold sway within organizations, it's our responsibility to do so. If we care about our jobs, our work, and our audience, then we absolutely must take a stand against arrogance in all its forms. Thing is, we're all fallible. No one here has an unblemished past. We've all made mistakes, and I will happily talk about them over several of these. The more you put in me, the more stories you get, and names, and places. The times when I failed as a designer and as a practitioner are times when I've been isolated, and not in a maverick way either, where my role in the process has been usurped and I've ended up working as an expensive colouring in tool. Fortunately, I'm in a position now for that to happen, not so much. But my early career was riddled with poor practice and below average standards. It's a shame, but only because of these failures, and on my part, these failures, and the failure for me to stick with my ideals and the things that I really believe in, that I'm able to talk about them now. And there's no slide for that, just my face. So, Dieter Rams, had to end up with him at some stage. He's a fine example of anti-arrogance. If you've seen any of his work, it's pretty much uniformly fantastic. And he said in one of his 10 rules, good design is thorough down to the last detail. Nothing must be arbitrary or left to chance. Care and accuracy in the design process shows respect towards the consumer. Good, thorough, detailed, care, accuracy, respect. Try and live by it for 48 hours and see how you feel about your job. If you have any questions after that time, then again, go back to the fishing slide. I'm going on and on about design. Just because you only write RFPs, create Gantt charts, and never put pencil to sketchbook, do not let yourself think or let anyone tell you you are not part of the design process, because you are, and you should own a sketchbook. Many of you clearly attend events like this, and you occasionally visit drinking establishments to talk with your colleagues and speak passionately about your work and your process and the people that you hate day to day. And hopefully you read books and watch documentaries and go to museums and attend talks outside of your field. This is anti-arrogance. We all have an idea and an understanding of what represents good and bad design and practice. We are better than it'll do. We can push ourselves past going for bronze. And we don't have to settle for let's just. By studying the successes and failures of our forebears in the industrial design and product design fields, we can avoid the inevitable pitfalls that ultimately lie ahead in the creation of digital products and services. With this cultural shift, we can be involved in good and, well, excellent design practice. After all, good design is either delightful or unnoticeable. It is never arrogant. Thanks very much.